So, Andrew, welcome to CTO Confessions. It's great to have you on board, sir.
Thanks for having me, TC. It's great to be here.
Brilliant. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And who do you work for?
My name is Andrew Overholt. I work for Mozilla. I'm the VP of engineering for our web platform group in Firefox. So basically, if you think of a web browser as being two boxes, you got the top, which is the user interface, everything down like tabs, address bar, toolbar, menus. And then you've got that area below where web content is. Well, my team is responsible for all the big box below with web content. And I'm based here in Toronto in Canada, and I've been at Mozilla since 2012.
Yes, yeah. And you've been at Red Hat as well, which is another interesting company.
It's true. It's interesting that you bring that up because I was at Red Hat for about a decade, had a great time there. The thing that originally attracted me to Red Hat was really the philosophy. I was an open source fan, Linux user, advocate for many years. And then when the opportunity came up to work at Red Hat, I took it. And I think maybe more for the philosophical aspect and less for the specific technology. And then, of course, I got really interested in the technology. And then I was there for about 10 years, doing a lot of tools for developers. So database developers, database administrators, and then into middleware area. And then spent a number of years working on the Eclipse platform, focused specifically on C++ developers and particularly on Linux. So after a number of years of doing that, I realized that I was interested in working on something that I could talk to my friends and neighbors and family members about, and not only the developers among them. You know, people who were in software knew what I was working on, but people who weren't had no idea. They're like, oh, cool. I don't know what you do. And so moving into something that was more consumer oriented, came to my mind. And then I knew a few people who were working at Mozilla. Had always been a Firefox user, obviously, pre-Firefox, Phoenix, Firebird, Netscape before that. Mozilla.org builds. And then this opportunity came up and moved into more of a consumer space and have been here ever since, having a great time.
That's fantastic. And I know what Eclipse is because I used it as a C++ engineer when I was in my embedded space, as we spoke about offline. So
yeah, that's awesome. I love it.
Great platform. Is that still around? I'm not.
Of course, they're still doing really well, still rocking. They've switched to a more frequent release model than we used to have back then. I still know a number of people that work there. Everybody's, of course, branched out. And it's fun to see on LinkedIn where people ended up. That's a great technology platform. And I often think back to what made people so productive working on it. And I think it was one of those things where I keep thinking of this lesson frequently of how do you get people to be productive? And there are a number of ways to do it, of course. But one of the ways that they did it technically was having the tool be used to build the tool. So they were dog fooding every single day, their last night's build, and they're also using the tool to build the tool. So the ability to do like inline JUnit, all the features were instantly there and fully self-contained.
That's fantastic. There's kind of integrity around that because you're using the tool to create the tool, and I didn't know that actually.
It's a really tight feedback loop, and you're right that people are users, right? You know, when people are working on a product but they're using a different product or something like that, you're like, well, how do you actually have user empathy? And I think being a user, you experience the pains and the joys of using something entirely. And it's sort of kind of similar in Firefox because I mentioned the user interface at the top and the browser content below. We actually use, our rendering engine to render web content is called Gecko, but we also use Gecko to render the browser interface itself. So it's pretty unique. The tabs, the menu bars, those are all just native. They're like HTML elements. They're programmed with JavaScript. They're styled with CSS. So when people ask me how they can, have a simple change in Firefox they could do themselves, my example is always like, what if you wanted to change the shape of the tabs? But then that's a terrible example because in reality, you could just change some CSS files and that would change it. And you don't even need to necessarily do a rebuild of the browser. So anyway, having the same engine powering the user interface and web content really gives us that ability to, again, it's kind of dog fooding. You're experiencing the same thing as website developers.
Hopefully we'll get back to that because I'm a big fan. I'm a systems thinker, so I think feedback loops are really important, even in our self-leadership, because, and that's a topic that I'm really kind of passionate about because we need good leaders in the world and tight feedback. So we'll come back to that. But first, I want to touch a topic that we spoke around offline. Sometimes I wish we start recording straight away because some of the topics offline are sometimes absolutely juicy. So I want to see if we can bring some of that juiciness back, okay? So we spoke about democratizing tech and you're kind of, so Mozilla is kind of like democratizing tech. It's in that space. I mean, what's your thoughts on democratizing tech?
I mean, you mentioned aligned incentives or feedback loops. I mean, I think that users having a say in the technology that impacts their lives is incredibly important. And technology is, I don't want to sound grandiose, but I mean, technology is our lives, right? Like, how much are we all using technology all day long? And so having a say in that, having a say and having a choice in that is incredibly important. And I'll give you an example. There was a publication that I wanted to read an article on, and they wanted you to use their native mobile app to look at it. And I was like, I don't really want to do this because I try and use the web interface whenever possible, but I tried to sign up for it to get access to the content. It was a 1-month trial. I signed up, I looked at the content, and then I realized that I wanted to pinch zoom in on one of the photographs. It was a photograph of like the G7 leaders or something at a thing. And I was like, who is that person that I don't recognize? I couldn't pinch zoom in the native mobile app because the intention was that they were controlling the content and the way that I consume it. Whereas when I had access on the web, I could pinch zoom, I could consume the content the way that I wanted to, the way that I needed to. And I don't even have a special need or a disability to consume things in different ways. But without that, there's no user choice. We're not putting users first.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a really important one. I do find that actually with certain apps that we're, cut and paste. Sometimes I want to grab something and you can't do it on the app. You're thinking, why are they not allowed me to do that? It's text, and you end up having to kind of jump through hoops if you really want to kind of get hold of that stuff. And you're thinking, why make this hard? Life's hard enough.
I know, exactly. You don't need to go through a screenshot and then OCR or the analog hole or something like that. So Mozilla is definitely a mission-driven organization, and our focus is around maintaining access and openness to the internet for everyone.
So you mentioned around openness, okay, and as per our conversations already, it's something that we're very passionate about. You mentioned the different layers of the technology used. What does that actually look like? What does that openness look like behind closed doors? So if we took a peek under the covers of the organization, how does that actually look?
Yeah. So I think it probably starts at the lowest level where you have defined standards for interoperability between web servers, web browsers, websites, and web browsers, and interoperability there. And so those standards are defined at various standards defining organizations like the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF, or the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, and various subgroups within them. There's also JavaScript, the language, which is standardized as part of ECMA, the European Computer Manufacturers Association. I'm really happy with my ability to get all these acronyms. And the technical committee number 39, TC 39, that's where JavaScript is standardized. And so those groups are made up of experts, and they're often working across organizational boundaries, including competitors. What's the phrase like? Co-opetition, you're cooperating, but you're competing. And so people are working together to try and, they have different organizational goals, but they're working together at these organizations to define the way things work. And one of my favorite examples of this is a standard that defines the word must and the word shall, because it's so important to define how technology should operate at that level. And these are written in English. And then the implementation happens where someone is turning that into actual code. And so in the case of the web, in the case of a web browser, Firefox is those lowest levels of the browser are implemented in systems programming languages. So we've got C, we've got C++, we've got Rust, and there's a little bit of assembly in the JavaScript engine. And so that is the lowest possible layer. In terms of openness, for Firefox, we have what's called a monorepo. So the source code for the browser engine, Gecko, and the browser front end for Windows, Mac, Linux, Android, it's all in one software repository. And that is currently, we actually just recently moved from hosting it ourselves in our data center using a system technology called Mercurial, a distributed version control system. We actually recently moved to hosting it on GitHub as our canonical host. So all the infrastructure is still run by us, but the hosting is provided by GitHub. And so that is one layer of openness that users can dig into the source code themselves and see what's happening. And it's verifiable. They can redo the builds themselves. They can make changes. They can make those changes for themselves. They can solve problems they're looking to solve. And that's one level of openness, but that's also just at the technologist level, right? Like if you're not a technologist, you're not able to understand those things or dig into those details. And so that at the level above, we have sort of verifiable things like end-to-end encryption, where we have the web's public key infrastructure. You click on the lock icon next to your address in your URL bar. In Firefox, we call the URL bar the awesome bar because it has a lot of awesome functionality. And so you can verify through that certificate system that you are getting the content intended to come from the publisher or whoever you're talking to. And that open system has actually been pioneered for about 20 years by Mozilla to ensure that the certificate issuers are following certain protocols and specifications and processes to ensure that no bad actors are getting involved there. And this has involved some interesting run-ins with various government agencies over the years, or governments who are trying to, probably in many cases, well-intentioned efforts to try and assert control there to protect individuals. But we believe in many of those instances, it actually takes the control away from users. And so we worked with government agencies hand in hand to explain to them the dangers of making those changes. And we have what we feel is a pretty great system of ensuring transparency and auditability so we're talking we've got auditability at the standards level, auditability at the code level, auditability at what you're actually building and using as a user, and then auditability at what you're seeing in terms of transparency from the encryption and from the knowing that you're getting the content you expect.
Wow, that's a lot going on there.
There are a lot of layers.
Yeah, and the fact that it's open as well and people can contribute towards it. So I can imagine it creates lots of branches. And, you're working with it from day to day. Doesn't that get very that's another layer of complexity that you need to manage?
Definitely. I was reading an article last night written by a guy that I used to work with, talking about how you manage that when you have. So in Firefox in 2024, I think that was last year, we did the stats for it. We had over 1,100 people, unique individuals, contribute code to the Firefox code base. And Mozilla itself is a smaller organization, and we definitely don't have that many engineers. So this is involving people from around, different organizations and individuals from around the world. And so you can imagine that does end up with a lot of complexity where you have, like you said, branches or forks and that kind of thing. We have a continuous integration system in Firefox where we do builds continuously. I guess that's kind of tautology in the name there. But TC, say you make a change and you submit it, and I say this looks pretty good, and we review it, then we run it through a series of tests. And I say a series of tests, maybe in your mind that's like a couple of tests. We verified that it kind of works. We're talking tens of thousands of tests that we're running every single day. So this is like computing time. We're spinning up virtual machines, or there are actual hardware machines this is running on in a data center somewhere. And we're running tens of thousands of these machines. So it's thousands of computing hours for every actual wall clock hour that we're running to validate that things aren't getting worse. And even with that, we still end up with regressions because you can't test every possible website. What are we talking at this point? Trillions of websites in the world? We can't possibly test every single one. So even though there are standards defining the way things are supposed to work interoperably and tests that verify that, you still end up with edge cases that maybe someone didn't validate, we couldn't validate. The permutations are infinite. Maybe not infinite, but pretty close. And so those forks, you have to have systems that maintain that for humans to try and bring it back in. So we always have the main line of Firefox, the main repository that we are building from every single day. We call it our nightly builds. I'm running it. Users can opt into using that. And it used to be called Minefield. Bit of a macabre reference, but it was perhaps back when you would have run into problems in the browser and it would break for you continuously. We've done a lot of work on quality over the years, whether that is in terms of like automated tests or validation and things like that, such that I run nightly every single day. Many of us do. And this is actually shipped twice within 24 hours. So this is the very latest changes that are shipping every single day to users. And so we're ensuring that those tests are passing and the quality is high so that we can validate the changes that are happening so quickly because it moves so fast. The web is continuously moving, and so we have to continuously adapt to do that. We're at the forefront of adapting it, of modifying it and making it better, but also need to adapt to make it better for users as we move along. So what you were getting at there perhaps was around forks of the source code base. And in the open source world, as you know, source code is many of the rights and the freedoms of users are to be able to fork that and change it the way they want to, whether that be for learning, to solve a problem they're getting, to take in a different direction than the original author. And so there are forks of the Firefox source code base, and there are forks of the browser itself that people are running. There are, of course, branding trademarks there, so they're not called Firefox, and there are different names. But those are challenging. The browser is very complicated. We're talking millions of lines of source code, and we've got deep domain expertise in all these different areas. It is very challenging to maintain a browser, and especially a browser engine, with the level of complexity and the level of change and the level of the fact that you're working in an environment with bad actors. When I first joined Mozilla, people were like, Andrew, the security situation around the web is very unique. You've come from client software that was running on people's machines that had known inputs and outputs, right? Like we talked about working on an IDE, an integrated development environment where maybe I'm typing in the source code or it's source code that I trust coming from my colleagues. in the web, you're going to a random website that you're then downloading and running their source code on your machine. And when you think about that, that's kind of a thing that you wouldn't normally do, right? And so this has to involve layers of sandboxing and security. And every once in a while, a very sophisticated bad actor may be able to pierce through those things and then start exploiting things from users. When that happens, we have to react to it really quickly. We call it a chem spill, like a chemical spill, like you're trying to contain the damage as quickly as possible and then ship out a thing. So there's actually a contest for this. Have you ever heard of Pwn to Own? PWN number 2 OWN, Pwn to Own. It's a contest every year that's sponsored for hackers where they can go and demonstrate how they have broken through the security barriers of various products. This includes browsers, operating systems. I think they've done it for some car platforms now. And so recently, the contest happened, and people are prepared for it every year because we know it's going to happen. And so then they say in advance, there's someone's going to try and exploit your product. And so we had everybody lined up, and they demonstrated that they could exploit Firefox. And so then, but the way that it works in this situation is that there's a contest, they're getting paid for it, but it's actually a professional and responsible disclosure, because then they give us the exploit. They tell us how it happened over. So then we have to figure out how we can fix it. And so in this case, I think we were 11 hours going from getting the exploit to diagnosing the problem, finding a fix for it, reviewing it, quality assuring it, getting builds out, and then shipping it to hundreds of millions of users. So 11 hours end to end. It was a real multi-team effort. And that is a real testament to, as you mentioned earlier, like the processes for dealing with changes coming from multiple people, the ability to deal with reason when you have this multi-million line code base with many moving pieces. How do you reason that? It's really down to human process and coordination.
Wow. You know what? It sounds really exciting. And the fact is, I mean, it's obviously cybersecurity and security on the web, and it's a huge thing. And a lot of companies are, hitting the horrible problems of actually being hacked. And I was talking to a company yesterday actually that are having a bit of a hard time around it. But do you ever, like, in some of these competitions where they actually manage to hack your software and just go, "You are kidding me," kind of thing?
Of course, and it's always a very skilled individual, often somebody that is maybe known in the community. So that this past year we made a change where, so like I mentioned earlier, that Firefox's user interface is written and rendered using the same technology as, of course, it's sandboxed and has different security considerations, but it's the same underlying technology. And so the way that worked is that we had inline event handlers happening in like the browser tab close button or various different things like that. Maybe that's a bad example, and the people on my team are going to say, "Andrew, you were wrong on that," but it's close enough. And so we had inline event handlers happening in the HTML code, and that's hard to validate what's going to happen in those cases. Hard to test and ensure there are security boundaries there. So we've actually we removed all those inline event handlers. We were told by one of the people who was in the contest that they were previously going to try and exploit that, but because we fixed that systematically, they were unable to exploit things. There are other ways to get around to try and proactively prevent these exploits, right? We have a thing we call our fuzzing system. Have you ever heard of this before? It's where you're generating basically random data to go into the system to ensure that that isn't able to trip it up. So we're generating like valid but random collections of HTML tags or valid but random JavaScript code. And then you're running that through the system, hoping that it doesn't go down some path that then turns into a memory exploit or actually somehow escaping the sandbox and that kind of thing. So we have a very active fuzzing system where we're always trying to get ahead of things. And then we also have a lot of proactive tests. With the advent of AI, it's become a bit of an arms race here. It was always a bit of an arms race, but it's become even more of an arms race because you can have these agents doing work for you and generating voluminous amounts of potential exploits faster than humans are able to do themselves. And so we have to try and stay ahead of that. And we are using various systems to try and prevent thwart those things before they come through from a bad actor.
Yeah. What I was going to say, because I find this fascinating, being a software engineer in the past myself as well. Testing was a big part of what I did. It actually allowed me to deploy things very quickly because I had a regression test. I mean, it was very basic stuff, but it allowed me to have a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling before I kind of actually stuck stuff onto the electronics, which is a lot harder to debug on there. It's better to do it. But the testing side of it sounds like there's probably more effort going into that than actually writing the code, because it kind of creates a lot more effort to kind of make sure that that's kind of tight. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
It's a great question. In terms of lines of code, I think that we probably still have way more lines of code in the actual implementation. But one of the nice things about the web is that you can write tests that are just web pages. And so we can like slurp in content that is a common pattern and make that into a test. Like, let's make sure this is working really well. And it's not just security testing. You know, you mentioned it's basic functionality. Does it work? Is it secure? Is it not leaking data? So is it user private? And also, does it work fast? Because that's another big thing, is how do you ensure that it works quickly? And so you could have something that is super secure, but it is slow. Like, look at the JavaScript engine situation, right? You've got JavaScript that's coming in. I say JavaScript. I think the Americans are going to say, "Isn't it JavaScript?" But we can excuse it, right? TC in our pronunciation. And so you get JavaScript that comes in. You could imagine a very simple interpreter that is just interpreting that, as a dynamic language that is happening in the browser as you go along. But we have layers in our JavaScript engine to be able to make that faster for users, because you and I, we're using a browser-based recording platform right now. How does that maintain its speed when it's written in JavaScript and it's just shipped over as raw JavaScript coming to me? As opposed to like something in Java where you're shipping bytecode, or something in another programming language where you're doing ahead of time compilation, or you mentioned your electronics thing, an even different paradigm there. And so the JavaScript engine has multiple tiers. Well, we have the interpreter, and that's just interpreting the JavaScript as you go along. But then we have multiple tiers of just-in-time compilers. We call these JITs, or JITs, just-in-time compilers. And so there are actually different tiers within them that do more compilation of things depending upon the needs of the site. So if you're running up like something that's running in the browser as a web application, and it starts running into what we call hot loops or something like that, where the code is getting executing a lot, the JavaScript engine is smart enough to then take that, and rather than taking that interpreted code, it will actually drop down and do a compilation on the fly into machine code, and then insert that into the engine, so that it's going from the interpreter into the machine code and then back, so it gets faster.
Wow.
And so that can happen dynamically, and then it happen at different tiers. So different parts of it can get hoisted up or into the machine code.
Wow.
And so that's where I mentioned the assembly bits, or that native compilation that is happening, because most of it is happening at an interpreted layer up above.
I can imagine a lot of listeners like myself were a bit surprised to hear that assembler comes into the equation here. That was quite a shock for me. I didn't expect that.
I mean, you think about what about porting to a new CPU architecture or something like that, like a new operating system. These are the kinds of things, when new CPUs come out, we often work with the hardware vendors to be able to get early access, so that we can make sure that Firefox has a full JIT tier on that thing before it gets out there. A friend of mine runs a PPC64 system, PowerPC 64, and I think we don't have our highest tier JITs for SpiderMonkey, our JavaScript engine, running on PPC64. And so he was like, "Hey, would you be willing to take a patch for this if I wrote it?" And I said, it's open source. You can do that. We're happy to take contributions. Like I mentioned, we have a fully open set of processes and tools where you can contribute, you can see the changes, you can make your own changes, you can run the tests, you can validate them, and then you can chat with people and get that review. And I should be clear, every line of code is reviewed by humans. So there's no, even though we have all these automated systems that make us feel, what did you say, give you a warm and fuzzy feeling? Confidence, right? There's still a human review for every single line of code. And so I make a change, I need you to review it. You make a change, you need me to review it. It's often not quite those pairs. It's teams or individuals or rotations. But every single line of code is reviewed by a person.
Yeah. And on that front, I feel like we're going into a really geeky rabbit hole, but I kind of loving this. So I'm going to, I'm the host, so I'm going to keep going. The whole kind of like reviewing as well, because I remember that somebody else looking at your code, people get a little bit precious about that. I mean, how do you manage that? Is it kind of, it's obviously going to be expected because you have to do it, but there's a kind of very constructive, very life affirming way of doing code reviewing.
You're totally correct. There's also a little bit of a vulnerability there, right? You have to be comfortable with others seeing your mistakes. And it's challenging. And honestly, it's not for everybody, right? There are individuals for whom they are uncomfortable with the scrutiny or the it really is vulnerability there of seeing your work being out there when it's not necessarily perfect. And I think a lot of us have this drive to be perfect. People talk about perfection versus practicality. And I think that we are often at the intersection of those things in the software world, especially in consumer software, where you have to make those choices between something that is the best possible implementation or the thing that works for users and can get out as soon as possible to deliver user value or to deliver, company value or something like that as soon as possible. So there's very frequently those trade-offs. I think this open source nature of things is something that reminds me of a moment earlier in my career that was a learning experience for me. The podcast here is called CTO Confessions, and I was thinking about something that I'm not super proud of. And it was probably about 20 years ago in my career where it may surprise you, TC, but as a younger man, I was rather brash and headstrong. And I think you probably don't know anybody who's ever been like that. And so I was in a cross-company working group, and somebody proposed an idea that I thought was on its face just completely wrong and honestly ridiculous. And I called that out in the meeting in a professional but direct way. And I think we've probably seen this in various open source communities of these people who are behaving in a rather uncivil way, or pointing out people's personal, mistakes or something like that. And sometimes you're drawing the person and the work together as one when, of course, they're separate. And so I called it out as how could we possibly consider that option, that there's no way that's going to work. The person then withdrew from participating in the group, and I realized that I felt bad. I'm like, was this my fault? And so then I actually spoke with them privately, apologized, realized that I had played a part in them getting uninvolved in things. They understood, they accepted my apology and said, they'd love to meet up in the future if we could. But it really taught me a lesson around humility and approaching things with curiosity. Because we really don't know people's motivations. We don't know exactly their thought process going into things. And so that's the way I've really approached my career over the 20 years since then. I think it was probably almost exactly 20 years ago to the day that this happened. And it's really stuck with me because, one, I felt really embarrassed by my behavior. And two, I've tried to learn from it and grow. And that's how I approach things both in my personal and professional lives, especially running a large organization like the Gecko engineering organization at Firefox. It's really an honor to do that, but also being able to approach it from a position of, we all have something to contribute. How can I learn? And in the case of open source software, how can we be comfortable with our work maybe not being the most perfect thing that we want to, we're not going to shine that to perfection, but how do we walk that line between perfection and practicality?
Yeah, that's a great example of humility. And I've had a very similar experience myself where, I've thrown stuff into the space and it's been quite very not life affirming at all. And I don't know if you've read the book, what's it called? The monkey paradox or something. It's basically it kind of fires up the ego in people, and then what it is that the monkey in each of us starts to kind of have an argument, and we have to be very careful of how we kind of feed back into the system so it doesn't trigger those kind of things. But yeah, it is interesting, and it's a great example and quite inspiring, I think, for a lot of leaders out there to really think about how they deliver stuff, the feedback loop into the space that actually makes it useful for all of us and doesn't put people off.
I wrote down the Monkey Paradox. I want to read that book.
Yes, I think I've got the title right, but I'll correct you if.
I mean, the internet can help us with these types of things. I was thinking about what you were saying around individuals and that kind of thing. And I think a lot of it is around aligning incentives, right? How do you get the best work out of someone? And I think it really comes down to aligning incentives. And, people are going to say that I sound like an economist or something like that, but the more I go through life and the more I go through work experiences, I think that's really true, because we really need to figure out what somebody is trying to get out of something, a situation or a career or a project opportunity that will lead them to putting in their best work and lead to the best outcome for the people that are assigning that work. And so one thing for me that's really, I've realized in my career, it's twofold. It's mission-based organization that I feel that I align with, the philosophical aspects of things, the values, and the opportunity for learning. And it's really, honestly, TC, I've really lucked out working at Mozilla, because it is both a mission-driven organization that I agree with the values, and they're enduring, and I feel like there's always work to be done there. And I learn so much every single day about the web platform because it is huge and it is continuously expanding. There's new capabilities, there's new paradigms, there's new ways of doing things, and security problems or performance problems or opportunities to improve in all these different areas. And so I really lucked out, and I'm super excited to continually be here because I have both aspects of my career and really what I feel what I get satisfaction from in my life. So the mission driven and the learning thing. So it's aligning incentives.
Brilliant. And on that mission, there's the open web, and I feel like Mozilla is in that kind of area of really fighting for the open. And you kind of mentioned some kind of, talking to, nation states, the kind of geopolitics of how they want to do stuff. I mean, that's a real fight to do that. And what's that like, to actually kind of, is it relentless? Is it, do other people represent that side of it? I mean, do you get involved in it?
That's a great question. I actually was on a call with your government 2 weeks ago. And I mean, I say the government. It wasn't like the prime minister and I were having a conversation about an agency within the government, right? And first of all, it was great because I do feel that people working in those agencies they are trying to balance those goals for their constituents or goals for the government or goals for the citizens with this multinational organization or not even organization, this multinational entity we call the internet or the web, right? Like these are things that are acting almost independent of countries. And so that's complicated for countries that are trying to deal with that and protect their citizens. So I was on a call just as I'm providing some technical information about a topic, but Mozilla actually has a policy team who specializes in this kind of thing, helping explain issues or helping advocate for what we believe are important changes in potential laws or existing laws and things like that. So I really do think that's where we've touched on all three aspects of it now. And so I'll say it like I think Mozilla, as a small organization, really punching above its weight, especially competing against big technology companies or with governments. We're a relatively small, what are we, like 1,000 people or something? Like it's a relatively small organization. And so I think it really comes from the strength comes from the alignment of the policy work, which is of course informed by our mission and our manifesto, our work on the standards definitions. So this is like people in my org and other parts of Mozilla are involved defining the very basic levels of the way the internet and the way technology, the web work together. So it's the policy, the mission, the standards definition, and then the implementation of those. And, historically, I think if you had maybe in the electronic space or maybe in other spaces, I've witnessed places where there was the team that did the standards definition and the team that did the implementation, and they were different teams. And that can lead to strengths, right? Because you're not having blurred lines between things, and it has to be very clear, protocol definitions. But we found at Mozilla that having the same teams and individuals involved in the standards evolution and definition and the implementation leads to a lot of strength because we can see it the next day or like the next week or whenever it's implemented. You can see it in code. It's manifest in the real world. You can test it right away and you can validate those things that you're assuming when you're writing a specification that you don't really know how it's going to work. You've got it sort of constructed in your head. You can actually see an implementation of it right away. And so that's where I think that Mozilla's power really comes from, is that alignment of the mission-driven policy, the standards definition, and really getting involved there to really put the users first, and really that hierarchy of constituencies like users and then like developers and then sort of business interests, like how we align those things really embedding it right in the standards, and then even further embedding it in our implementation of those standards so that it is really putting our mission into practical use and into reality in the hands of users.
Wow, love it. Yes. Fascinating stuff. All this stuff going on behind the scenes, and it does feel like a very noble fight, for something, it's not just a browser. There's something more to it than that.
I mean, the internet is an amazing evolution of human capability and communication and interactivity and learning and commerce and all those things. And we really do feel a responsibility as stewards of that to ensure that it remains accessible and open to humans and evolves as the needs evolve with humans.
A previous guest of ours, Lord Holmes, one of the peers of the House of Lords, he's really into tech. I would love to make an introduction to you. And he's very much into the tech he wants to make it less extractive and more generative, because it has, as you say, it has an impact on us. And there's a lot of players out there that have got very kind of selfish needs, but I think you can still have a little bit of what they need, but we also need to look at the bigger picture of how it's developing us, and we can see how the internet's dividing us as well, with the echo chambers that we get stuck in, including myself.
We all do. We're all human, right? Unfortunately, but also fortunately. But I agree. And I said the constituencies, the users, the consumers of it, the technology purveyors, the developers, the designers, and then the people that have commercial or other interests, right? Whether it be government or information. I think it's really important to balance those interests and find the right balance. This thing with division and bad content and stuff like that is a really difficult subject. It's a tough one to tackle because you're trying to both protect the integrity of the content so that users know that they're not having something manipulated upstream from them. And by that, I mean, if I have an encrypted connection to your web server, then I know that I'm getting the content that you intended. Whereas if it's an unencrypted content stream, it's like sending a postcard in the mail. someone could modify that postcard, but I can't necessarily tell because it's just exposed and they could have seen it. They can read my thing and they can, they can modify it however they would like. And so how do I then trust like a news source or something like that if I can't trust that it was, consistent in transit from the source to me? And so, when you have that, you can have content that people may want to, the word spy on is perhaps maybe rankles some individuals, but I think you balance the needs of the many versus the individual autonomy and priority, and it's a tough struggle. Yeah,
very big, huge topic.
Yes,
I just want to read something off the Firefox website, which I was quite interested in. I'd love to get your take on it. Today, we are still not for profit, still not owned by any billionaires, and still working to make the internet and the time you spend on it better. What does that mean to you personally?
That's a great question. So for me personally, it's definitely inspiring. And I think it really ties in earlier what I mentioned about these incentives, about why I want to be here and why many of my colleagues are here. That aligned and shared sense of mission and values of putting people, putting the technology, putting the capabilities of technology in the hands of individuals and providing that choice is really important to me. And what did the quote say again? We're not owned by billionaires. It is an advantage that we have. Like, we are able to be a mission-driven organization that doesn't have shareholders demanding shareholder returns or value there. So it really gives us an unfair advantage because we can do the right thing and we can put users first, we can put technology first, we can put these choices first, and it's really powerful. It also is really a powerful lever when recruiting individuals to work here. When we have some open recs right now, we're trying to hire people, and it's really an unfair advantage when you're like, people say they're mission driven, and many, of course, every organization has its own mission, but being an aligned public benefit mission is really just an amazing advantage you have of being able to say, no, but we really do put that forward. There are, of course, the needs to pay individuals, and we have bills to pay. I mentioned our continuous integration system. Well, that's millions of dollars we're paying every year for those cloud computing costs. But not only that, the individuals that are here need to make a living. And so there is need to make money there. But not having the incentives that, I think we could probably agree sometimes are perverse between business interests and the consumers of their products is really freeing.
Yes, I can imagine it is. I love this. You keep coming back to this mission driven. There's an integrity around that. And I love that. I find that really quite enticing to be a part of that, because you can do the right thing, and also the values, and I guess the statements, the principles that the mission kind of holds, allows you to make better decisions. It actually makes decision making easier in some respects.
In some respects, definitely. And we have so there's the mission, and then there's the manifesto. So the manifesto has a number of points that are laid out, and we try and say, like, well, manifesto point number 7 says this, so we should refer back to that when making this decision. Sometimes people don't like it when they get called on it. Like, actually, you made the wrong decision. Look at this; it contradicts this, and we're like, oh, I guess you're right. But in other cases, it makes decision making difficult because you're always trying to do the right thing, by the mission or by the manifesto. And again, those aren't. Our CEO has a saying she says that they're not. The manifesto isn't an operating guide. And so we are still sort of like, even though we have these guiding principles, you're still trying to find the way they apply in any particular situation, or what the actual next action should be that aligns with those principles and those guiding principles.
Yeah. Again, another huge topic. I could talk for hours on this. I think it's the fundamental stuff that really drives the direction of organizations. And I think we all need to spend a bit more time on it, kind of chewing on it, seeing what it means, where does it take us? Because sometimes we kind of head off in directions and it just sends us down rabbit holes, which are not where we want it to be. Yeah.
Reevaluation of goals and motivations and where we're going. I mean, it's really important. It's also a luxury sometimes, right? People don't have the opportunity or the time to be able to do that. And I count myself incredibly lucky to be able to be part of an organization that is doing this, but also B, to be in a fortunate position of stability, in my life and in my country, and being able to be able to do this. And so I feel like a sense of responsibility to do the best that I can in that situation.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of your competitors, let's talk about your competitors, because there's a few out there. I know I use a few of them as well, so there's kind of a mixed bag there. is Firefox and Mozilla kind of like a breakaway? Are you trying to be different? Or what's your explanation on that? What do you think?
It's a great question. So Mozilla or Firefox's market share is not as high as I would personally like it to be. However, would I want us to be at 100% and every single user in the world is using Firefox browser? It's an interesting thought experiment. I think on the one hand, yes, because I do feel that we're putting users first, we're providing a lot of value, we're allowing people to be themselves online and explore and be creative and all that kind of stuff in a safe and private way. But on the other hand, competition is really important, right? Like think about any ecosystem. I was talking to somebody about development here in the city, and you don't want a homogenous ecosystem where every store is the same or every building looks the same, because then it's boring. Or in a biological ecosystem, you end up with vulnerabilities there. And so if it's the same thing in the software, we talked about security earlier. If we're all built on the same technology base and there becomes an exploit for that technology base, then we're all vulnerable to the same thing. And so having a diversity of implementation is also really important to strengthen things. That's why I like that separation between the standards definition and the implementation, because it provides that ability to have multiple implementations for important and for strengthening things and for learning from each other. So our competition is often some of the largest companies in the world, and it's challenging to compete with them. Of course, companies are made up of individuals, and the web browser world is small, and we know each other. Everyone knows each other at all these different organizations. Not everyone, but many of us do. Oh yeah, and we talk, we work together on things. We are often trying to solve the same problems together. And so there is a sense of collegiality there, where we are competing at the end of the day, but we are working together on many of the same problems and learning from each other. And so it's challenging when you have resource constraints that are different across those organizations. And so we struggle with this. Like one of my colleagues on the Chrome team and I will sometimes speak about our ability to invest more in one area than the other. And we'll talk about like, hey, well, we're putting a lot of effort in this right now. I know you can't work on that right now, but we'd love it if you could provide a bit of oversight or guidance, just kind of help us and make sure that when you then have the time to come back to it, it's not far off the beaten path of where you would have gone anyway. But it is challenging with the number of staff members and the number of marketing resources and all that kind of stuff that it becomes very challenging. So Firefox really grew 20 years ago. So we're actually coming up on our 21st birthday, actually, in November of Firefox itself. But I mentioned earlier some of the precursors, and maybe you were aware of things back from, the Mozilla project came out of the Netscape Communications Corporation starting in 1998. There's a fun documentary from 1998 or from 2000 around there about the open source, the beginning of the Mozilla open source project called Code Rush. It's a really great time capsule of mid-90s California fashions. You can see what everyone's jeans looked like. It's pretty fun. But it showcased the beginning of the project. And then its evolution since then has really been to this open source Mozilla Foundation after AOL created that and jettisoned it, and then into the Mozilla Corporation, of which I'm an employee that is fully owned by the nonprofit Mozilla Foundation. And so Firefox itself released in 2004, and Mozilla has gone through various phases of market share percentage of users on the web using Firefox. And of course, that's also sometimes a challenge for us because sometimes the technology that is used to ascertain which browser people are using is something that we would consider a tracker. And so we go out of our way to block tracking technology so the users can't be tracked across different websites or different technologies as they're browsing the web. And so we do sometimes wonder if the technology that says how many people are using Firefox is actually being blocked by Firefox, and therefore we have a lower market share than we think we might than externally. But so I think having a diversity of engines is really important, and having the competition is important, but it is a challenge. And these well-funded competitors are very much they're much more well-funded than we are, and it's a competition. But I will say that I think it's really important to have this diversity of browser engines, and especially Gecko, because we are not controlled by the interests of a large corporation. And if we ended up in a world where there was some sort of the Google world and the Apple world, maybe Microsoft is in there, maybe some of the other larger like AI companies somehow get in there. I don't think that's as good as we currently have it, where we have Gecko, which is run by this organization that is a not-for-profit, and we're putting users first because it allows us to be this force for good, but also this equalizing force when you have different corporate interests. And sometimes you end up in a world where those corporate interests can't align because of their organizational thrusts or goals or restrictions. And we can be a voice of reason, often mediating things between them. And so I think it's really important for us to maintain that multi-stakeholder collaboration, but also Gecko plays a really outsized role there. We're a very small organization compared to these large companies, but we have outsized influence because we can infuse user value and also be that equalizing force between them, and ensuring that the standards are defined, putting users first, or towards, working towards our mission in line with our manifesto, and then implemented in the same way. So it is interoperable, but putting users first. And that also is an interesting thing to think about when you think about these standards, because they're interoperable, but they also allow for independent implementations that can have nuance between them. And so I guess it's kind of similar to communication, right? We have like protocols, but we all have our own little way of speaking. I was reading about Morse code and the way that you could tell almost like an accent of a person who was using the Morse code because of the way, the pacing and the way they would do it. And so I think that the implementation of these standards that is unique to the organization's interests or values provides opportunity for differentiation and delivering value to users in different ways, and then providing user choice.
Yeah, I love it. Again, a fascinating talk. The fact that you even kind of mentioned you got these kind of clear APIs and interfaces, which I'm a big fan of, because I think once you open up APIs, it just kind of democratizes the space. It allows people to kind of get hold of stuff in a safe way, various bits. I'm just kind of thinking about your development of Firefox, and I don't know if you can tell me anything here, but I'm going to ask the cheeky question. I'm a bit of a cheeky monkey, on that front. Is there any developments that you can kind of share that are happening in Firefox now that people would be interested in hearing about?
So it's an interesting question, because Firefox being open source means that you could actually be following along with our Git repository and maybe get an idea of this. But you mentioned signal to noise earlier. There's a lot of volume there, right? We have lots of people making changes every single day. So sometimes it's hard to kind of piece those things, pull the signal out of the noise. But I can tell you about some of our upcoming work with AI. Now, I don't know if you've heard of it, AI. It's a bit of a thing, having a bit of a moment. Yeah, it's not very common. But we are working on how we can, the internet technology, it is evolving, and we're trying to stay ahead of that. And how do we empower users and bring these values that we've brought to the web to the new paradigms of maybe AI-driven technology or AI-mediated content for users? And so we're doing things such as integrating a sidebar in Firefox where you have your AI agent, maybe it's a chat bot, maybe it's something like that can actually, you give it permissions to access the content of the page that you're on. So then it's got that added context of the web page. But how do you do that in a way that is privacy preserving and user respecting? So we're looking at ways where we could actually proxy the traffic between, so we could mediate it, and we could strip out user identifiable information. Or being very clear with users and these services around what information goes between the different things. So integrating these tools and figuring out how to evolve the browser in this world of people maybe not going directly to the website source, but maybe getting AI-mediated content is a very interesting thing. And how do you ensure that users are aware of where the first-party source is, or the primary source is, or how did they get to the content author? And how do you monetize that in a world where up until now, for how long has the web been monetized largely by ads and ads that are displayed on websites? And you go to that website and the author of that content is getting revenue as a share from those ads. How do you do that when the content then is being consumed in a different place and aggregated, and then you're not even going to those sites? So these are the kind of areas that we're exploring and thinking about how we can not disrupt the economic models too directly without coming up with alternatives and figuring those kinds of things. But these are broad questions, and sometimes they require societal answers, right? And how we can, governments can regulate these things, or you may have heard about these government cases that are sometimes brought against technology players, and the resolutions and the remedies that are coming out of these cases they're fraught with difficulties to try and come up with something that is not going to have unintended consequences.
That's right. Yeah, I do follow some of it. I usually at the rough end of it. I mean, for example, the cookies, the implementation of. I mean, that's. I totally understand the purpose behind it and how we're trying to protect people, but it's kind of turned out into a bit of a pain. I was going to use a bad word then, but
and then how often do you go to a website where you have to click at the bottom whether you accept the cookies or you reject the cookies, or you want to customize which cookies you're getting? It is an unfortunate unintended consequence of trying to make people aware of where they're being tracked. So a couple years ago, Firefox shipped a feature called Total Cookie Protection, which has the amazing acronym of TCP, which is the same as Transmission Control Protocol from the lower layer of the internet stack. And so, but what we've been doing for years is what we sort of call, some people call it double keying, where if I go to andrewoverholt.com, and then there's an ad there from your website, and then I go to your website, maybe you can tell that I've been there because the content is being transmitted because it's the same URL, same domain. We've been doing double keying, or where there are different cookie jars. So basically the combination of my website and your website being syndicated on mine goes into a separate cookie jar than when I go to your site directly or when I go to my site directly. So that avoids that ability to track things across, where you can have like an ad network that is putting content across many different websites, and then when you go to all of them, it then has the ability to track you, to indicate to see that it is the same person or the same user agent that's going across. You mentioned earlier about sort of putting users together first and how you prioritize that, and I just thought of the term we use, user agent. A browser, we think of it as a user agent, right? As an agent on behalf of a user. So there's a thing called the user agent string. And in every HTTP request that is happening, the user agent string is then indicating what the agent is that is requesting the content. And so it's a problem because sites can then tell what browser is talking to them. And so sometimes people will not want to test in a certain browser. And so they'll just bar that browser based on the user agent string. And so we run into problems where people are only testing with the largest players, and then they say, we don't want to QA, we don't want to do quality assurance for this with other smaller browsers. And so they'll limit the users to only be able to use those ones they've QA'd. And so we can work with them to say, well, is there some sort of interoperable standard you don't have here? Is there a problem? And once we determine that, in many cases, either if they can't do it, they can't turn it on, or they don't want to make that choice, then we can verify for ourselves that it does work fine in Firefox. And then we can actually go on the user's behalf and pretend that we are one of the major players and actually pretend that Firefox is them instead, which is a whole interesting question around, like, does that decrease people's knowledge of our market share and a bunch of things? But again, we're putting users first, and that is what really matters. So we're making the content work for them because that is what they're coming to the browser. Again, it's an agent for them. But going back to the AI world, how does this work when agents are working on behalf of things other than users, right? Is the agent that's out there scraping the web and turning this content, is that my agent, or is that an organization's agent? And where are the incentives there? And how do I know what bias is being injected, if any? And so it's a challenging world, and we're trying to adapt with it as we move forward.
Yeah, I can imagine we kind of joke about it if you heard about this AI, but it's just changing everything. It's just, I've got a 17-year-old, coming on 18-year-old, and I'm thinking, what's she going to be doing? I mean, I'm not going to change overnight, but the landscape has just shifted, and we're all trying to find our way forward.
100%. I was watching an old rerun of Star Trek: The Next Generation and thinking about the way that, I mean, it's fiction, right? But the way they consume information. And are we moving to that world where there's this omniscient or supposedly omniscient, entity that's giving me information or not? And in a conversational way, is that the most effective medium for communicating? I don't really know. AI around software development is something that I'm thinking a lot about these days. And I mentioned earlier learning. I'm personally actually having fun learning about the way these technologies work for personal projects and thinking about how they could apply to Firefox development as well, because you read so much about these AI tools and whether we could replace ourselves as software developers. And what does that mean, right? You mentioned, young people and what are they going to do in the future? But what about software developers who are young or old, experienced, inexperienced, whatever? What is the world? What does the employment world look like for them? And I think at the moment, I've come to the conclusion that these tools are incredibly powerful for people who are knowledgeable and senior, especially in an established code base. Like the Firefox code base is modern, but it's been evolving for 27 years. And so it's got modern best practices, but it's also gigantic. And so no one can hold that whole thing in their head, and nor can AI models hold that many tokens in their head, right? The context window. And so how do you couple humans with the technology that empowers them? And so what I've come to the conclusion of is that these tools are beneficial for senior developers who are confident is the wrong word, who are knowledgeable and understand the trade-offs and understand the systems deep enough to be able to know when something is broken. But they're risky for people who are novices in a code base, especially because, so there's a new API called the URL parser. Let's ignore another part. There's a new API for the web, and we wanted to implement it. We are shipping it in Firefox, in Gecko. colleague of mine at the office was working on an implementation of it. And I said to myself, I wonder if I could implement that using an AI tool. And so then I ran it through the specification. I mentioned these specifications. I ran a specification through an AI tool and said, could you make an implementation of this in the Firefox code base? And it actually did like a half decent job, maybe like a 25% decent job, but it would have gotten me there if I was familiar enough with the code. So I sent it to the person who was working on the implementation, which of course, in the meantime, we had shipped. And I said, 6 months ago, if I had given this to you, or 3 months ago before you started working on it, would it have helped you along? And he said, well, okay, this part of it is definitely wrong, but this part is interesting. And this part was the boilerplate that I would have saved me an hour of having to go through those pieces. And so I think really that is where at the moment the potential is to really supercharge people who are capable in these code bases already. Because if me, not an expert in that, if I had said, well, it seems to work and passes the test, let's just ship it. What security holes am I introducing? What vulnerabilities am I introducing? What privacy holes? What performance problems am I introducing? Is it even accessible to users with a screen reader? All those different kinds of things. And so having really coupling the expert human with the expert tool, I think is where we're going.
Yeah. Love it. Great. Another great big topic, like big topics here, all around. With Firefox's engineering roadmap, is it shaped by user demand, market competition, or the mission that we speak about?
It's probably shaped by all three, actually. And so let's talk about the first one, user demand. We have our bug tracker, our open bug tracker, which has been open since 1998, bugzilla.mozilla.org. You can go right now and check things there. You can create an account, you can file bugs. So that's one source of issues that we use to prioritize our roadmap, to put on a roadmap. And we're always trying to balance, like, I found a bug the other day with a site that my family was using, and somebody said, okay, we can fix it for you, Andrew, but there are more important bugs that are affecting millions of people. Maybe we'll prioritize those over yours. And I said, well, fine. We'll talk about that during your performance review. No, I'm just kidding. But so we have that as a source of prioritization, but we also have what's coming down from these standards organizations, again, that we're participating in. So we're saying, like, where is the next demand for this? Where is, is it scroll linked animations? Is it something, advancements in CSS container queries? Is it new JavaScript language features? Is it something with WebAssembly? All those types of things. We're trying to balance those. And then we have something called Mozilla Connect. And this is an area, it's a website. People can go to it, connect.mozilla.org, where people can propose ideas, request features, and then vote on them. And so there's a way we can rank them, and you can sort them by the number of votes and things like that. And so we're trying to balance user features there. So we've had a number of features that we're shipping right now that have come out of that. And so one of those examples is on Windows machines, where you want to actually pin a website to the taskbar on Windows at the bottom. Is it the taskbar, whatever the thing is called, to the bottom? And you could have the BBC as a separate application in Windows, if you will. But it's just a Firefox tab running in the background. And so this kind of, we're calling them, it's the taskbar. That's what it's called. We're calling them taskbar tabs. You can take a tab and make it into a taskbar entry at the bottom, and it stays there and it resides, and you can have, notifications and the favicon changes and that kind of thing. So that idea has been around for a long time, but we were trying to make it work in the best way possible for users and with the technology. And that idea had been debated and discussed on Mozilla Connect for months. People were talking about it and demanding, requesting it, that kind of thing. And so we've got that user demand. Now, market forces is another place where we definitely have to pay attention. And I think from my purview being what the browser provides to web developers and websites, that is largely driven by APIs that are coming from standards organizations. And oftentimes one of the browsers is shipping something before the others. And so they're sort of creating that trail that people will not want to follow. And so we, among the browser vendors, we are often sharing data around, okay, we're seeing that this API is used by, we just started shipping it. You're not yet, but it's used already by 5% of the websites. You should probably think about doing that. And so we try and work together to make sure that those things are it's always incremental progress from one to the other, and then we're all kind of catching up. We actually have a system called Interop. It's very imaginatively named, and there's a year after it. And so this year, guess what? It's Interop 2025. And so this is a set of APIs and capabilities in the browser, again, I get the engine level, but for websites to use, that all the browser engines, the major ones, agreed upon that we would work towards having all of us shipping those and passing all of the tests. So there's a large set of tests, web platform tests, tens of thousands of them, that we want to pass equally among each of them. So you can actually look right now and see which browser is passing which tests and what percentage. And then as we all go through the year trying to work towards Interop 2025, ending with those being a set of APIs that developers can use and know they are interoperable if they're following the standards. And so that's what I think of when I think of market forces. But you've also got things like we talked about AI, how we can integrate that into the browser. And an interesting feature that we just talked about yesterday, basically, or 2 days ago, the new iPhones were announced. And there's a feature for Firefox for iOS where you go to a website and we're using Apple Intelligence on the device where if you shake the phone, it will give you a summary of the web page using AI technology. So we're going to see how that's adopted by individuals. You know, I do worry about a world where content is generated by AI and then summarized by AI. Like there's got to be fidelity loss at each level of that summarization. But we're going to see how users find that. And I think it's a potentially user empowering thing. We all consume a lot of content every day, and I think it's a fun, shake the phone together.
I'd use that. I would definitely use that,
And so that kind of market force is another one that comes in there. And then what was the third? The third, you said market force is,
Yes, we had used demand and also the mission, the mission that underlies all the stuff.
Of course. And I think that what you said is 100% true, underlying. It's really the foundation. It's the thing that we're bouncing ideas off or running things through that. In 2013, so if you can cast your mind back to the heady days of 2013, I should have a pithy thing around like what song was popular in 2013. But anyway, 2013, I was working on policy for us around what APIs we exposed to the web. And so really back in the day, you had the situation where browsers were exposing what we called prefixed APIs. So rather than me saying you using the API for like an animation, you could use something that was Mozilla specific called Moz animation. But that's not great because it's not interoperable. And then people are targeting websites, they have to write them for more than one browser. Like that's just not ideal. And so we worked over the years to remove those prefixes and have them be standard APIs, again, that go through the organizations. And then we try and make them interoperable through tests, and then we're shipping them. So I wrote a policy of when we would expose things. We called it our exposure guidelines of what gets exposed to at what stage of the standardization process, and we don't use those prefixes anymore. And so as a part of this, I had these banners made that say, "Is this good for the web?" And I actually used the same font and color as the movie Office Space had a banner that said, "Is this good for the company?" And I had these banners shipped to all. At the time, Mozilla had offices around the world, and I shipped one to each of the offices, and we had a meeting where I got everybody to unveil the banner at the same time. And to this day, it is hanging over where I used to sit in the office over here from the ventilation system. And it says, "Is this good for the web?" Because that is really one of the manifestations of I'm sorry, I'm using the word manifestation here when I don't mean the manifesto, but it's really a manifestation of the Mozilla mission of as we are exposing things to the web, there is risk there, right? Because it's really hard to take things away once they're exposed. The web is kind of forever. Deprecating things is challenging. And also, what risks are there in exposing something in terms of capabilities from the user's machine you're exposing? How can that be taken advantage of? And so we really try and use that mission as the, I guess you could say the reflection, the mirror. We're looking in the mirror of the mission. We're using it as an undergirding of all of our actions. And one way that it comes to the fore with web APIs exposed is through, is this good for the web? Are we advancing the web? Are we putting users first? What is our underlying motivation from these things?
Beautiful, beautiful.
TC, you mentioned APIs earlier. I just wanted to quickly touch on API documentation and how you get started with things. When you were using electronics, when you're as an IC, as an individual contributor, as an engineer, what documentation sources are you using, or were you using?
Well, I mean, there's obviously data sheets, the manuals.
Yes.
We didn't have the internet wasn't huge then. It was kind of emerging, so there was some stuff out there, but not a great deal. But mostly manuals. It was data sheets.
I remember buying a paper copy, which it might even be on my shelf over here, of the Canadian ISO standard. So we're talking like what the 1000 separator is, all that different kind of thing defined for as a Canadian. I was very interested in that. But one thing that I think is really important as we've moved into the manuals and things being online is shared authoritative documentation. And one thing that I think is another great way that browsers compete but work together on things is through shared documentation. And so there's a website, developer.mozilla.org, known as MDN, and we really try and work for this to be the canonical source of documentation for all APIs on the web. And so as new things are being developed, their documentation is being added there with examples, and it's also collaborative and open space. So everyone can use that and can contribute to that and can know that it is authoritative and that it can always improve.
Wow, fascinating. Obviously, I'm really blown away with the complexity of the world that you live in, and the even for the fact that you mentioned a second ago, deprecating is really hard, and I actually felt that kind of the weight of what that must feel like for the developers, the users, the websites for companies. If you deprecate something, it's going to probably break something somewhere, and it's going to have a cost.
And how many web pages are there from 1999 that we need to make sure they still work?
Yeah, it's just nuts. And what I'm hearing here really beautifully is this real care for all the different stakeholders. Not just what your organization, but the web developers, the users, the companies, even the private companies, because they need to make money out of this stuff. He's looking after all them. So yeah, there's a real kind of, I don't know, I'm feeling kindness in the space.
It wasn't what I intended to impart today, but I agree. I mean, it's a collegial thing. We're working together, and it's a shared human resource. We need to evolve together.
So Andrew, my mind just kind of went back to an area, when I'm using the browser, there's always this worry that I'm being kind of tracked, or, they kind of, I always wonder, sometimes when the adverts are coming up, even on other devices somewhere, have they kind of done a big feedback loop to some other part of the system, it gets your mind kind of going. What is Mozilla and Firefox doing around that to maybe help users be protected?
It's a really interesting space and a challenging one too. We talked about deprecating APIs. Well, what about trying to block APIs that we know are tracking users from, say, an analytics platform or something like that? So if we're blocking something we have a tracking protection list that we ship, where these are known trackers that are being, that are sprinkled across various content pieces on the web, or maybe distributed through networks, that we are trying to block for users, that they're not getting shipping. But sometimes they're not getting tracked. But sometimes those tracking things are actually part of the rendering of the website. So then we have to do things like actually shim them and ship a local thing where we can override and pretend that it's using that tracking thing, so that the site will move forward and allow functionality, but we're actually copying and making sure the content never leaves the user's site. There's also things, you mentioned tracking, there's also things like fingerprintability. Your browser fingerprint, and when we talk about fingerprint, we mean not like a fingerprint, but we mean things like, is this, can someone get my fingerprint from this? What we mean are things like the unique combination of my screen resolution, my browser user agent. We call that the user agent string, the UA string. So what my browser is sending, it's sending that I'm running on Windows, Mac, or Linux, or something like that, or Android, iOS. It's sending what browser I'm running. But we also, the site can then query things like, what size is your browser window? As you resize it, what fonts do you have installed that I can render? Do you have any extensions? Do you have any add-ons? Do you have add-ons? Does something, even timing ability is different, right? Like if I run this code, does it run faster or slower? That means it's cached. That means you probably have this feature enabled. And so you can fingerprint users to the point where they are individually identifiable and unique. And so we're experimenting with fingerprinting protection, or FPP, where we can actually try and prevent users from being as fingerprintable as they were before. And we're getting big chunks of, if we add variance to this thing, like make this a little bit, you could call it fuzzing, or like you make it so that there are error bars around something, is not as precise. Let's say for drawing on a canvas or something like that. If we do that, it reduces your uniqueness, like the ability for me to fingerprint you, down by like 7% or 17, whatever it is. And so we're finding these like low-hanging fruit pieces of where we can make people less fingerprintable as we go along. But the risk with those, of course, is that you could break things. And so we really have to be cautious as we roll these things out and do experiments where we're saying, okay, we're going to try it with 0.1% of the population and we're going to see how it works. We're going to try it with 1% of the population and see how it works. And also, we don't necessarily know what people are being fingerprinted by. And so we want to collect the information to know, are people uniquely fingerprintable with that information? And so how do you collect that information in a user privacy preserving way? Well, we're using other technologies such as oblivious HTTP, where you have another person, another entity, a proxy in the way that is, so your information about like the, say your IP address and other things like that is being stripped out by that proxy, and it is encrypted so that only that proxy can see it and strip that out. And then the payload of it is encrypted again so that only the end result, we can see it. So we can't see the identifiable bits and they can't see the contents of the probe. And then we're getting the information to be able to do it in a way that we are confident we're not getting any user data. We want to make it so that we are encoding a technology so that we cannot know things about the individual. We want to make it so that it is private, and it is provably private, auditable from the code, and then provable from what is actually being encrypted through the systems. And so we're using that to collect information about what is fingerprintable and then trying to prevent people from being fingerprinted. So it's a multi-layered approach and a multi-step approach, and a cautious one we have to take over a number of years to get there.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm a techie, right? So I can't, and there's millions, billions of people out there that don't know this stuff is going on. And I'm in awe of it because, you're right. It does give a signature of a user, and that can be tracked. And that's very powerful for a lot of people out there. So I'm glad people like you are fighting a good fight for us. Keep fighting, keep fighting. So here we go. A prediction for the web for the next 5 years. I mean, obviously AI, we've kind of mentioned that. Is there anything else that you kind of imagine? Because, the internet has, I just love what the internet has brought us, but I also kind of hold my head and just kind of want to pull my hair out sometimes as where it's kind of taken us as well in some respects. What's your prediction for the next 5 years?
So I think more technical capability is always going to happen and is always on the card. So this is like new APIs like Web GPU. So this is a newer way for websites to be able to use the graphics capabilities on your device, on your computer. And I think historically, people didn't necessarily have high-powered GPUs, and so then you were looking at games or really rich visual effects that were not happening in the web because it was originally a document-based medium, and you couldn't rely on hardware capabilities on the user's machine. But as we get more capabilities, like some of the web audio APIs, the new versions of WebRTC, that's the real-time communication platform like we're using now for doing video and audio transmission. When you start combining those things with Web GPU, which is GPU-backed computation and interesting things, combine those things, and you end up with a lot of really interesting capabilities for user experiences. So immersive experiences, really rich, high frame rate, high resolution, locally running execution using things like WebAssembly. We've had a couple of years of WebAssembly here where I mentioned earlier JavaScript engine tiers of the JITs. Well, WebAssembly is like you're writing at a lower level, but it is running a lot faster. The promise is around 1.5 to 2 times the speed execution time of writing something in C++, but with the portability and security of Sandbox of running in a WebAssembly there. So I can see adoption of those technologies coming together with the possibility that I'm not creative enough to imagine them, but I think empowering that next generation of developers to really create those and provide those experiences to users. And you mentioned AI. Obviously, that's going to be another big thing. I'm really proud of the local AI work that we're doing in Firefox. And this isn't AI just for AI's sake. Like, we have a translation feature where you can translate from various languages. So that I live in Canada, and so sometimes I'll run into content in French and I want to read it in English. Or the other way around, and I can press a button and it will translate it. But that translation happens locally on my machine, so it's fully private. So I'm not sending it to some server somewhere saying, oh, Andrew's looking at the poutine menu at a restaurant in Montreal that he's going to go to. No one knows because it's happening locally on my machine and it's fully private to me. But that is actually powered by AI. It is a local AI model that we download and run on your machine locally. And so I think as capabilities at the hardware level become more capable in newer hardware, and as older machines, go away, people replace them, I think there's just going to be more capabilities there that we're not sure exactly what will happen, but I'm excited to see them. And I'm also excited to see the fact that we have them being private by design and user empowering, because that's really what makes it special.
Wow. Yeah, AI at the edge. This is a conversation I've had on many occasions. And I always, because I don't kind of work in that space, I always think, that's going to be too heavy for the edge. That's going to be too much. But obviously you're doing it, eh? So...
we're trying. I think there's a lot of practitioners out there. There's a lot of money in this space right now, right? And trying to make sure where those incentives aligned and where you can do it. And we're trying to have the same level of influence and again, user empowerment and user choice that we saw and Mozilla helped steer in the early days of the web, and over the past 25 years, how do we continue to do that as the world expands into more AI?
Yeah, love it, love it. So as we come towards our closing arc, I could speak to you for hours, Andrew, but unfortunately we're kind of restricted by time. I want to speak, before we go, I want to speak about your leadership, because obviously you've had many, many years at Mozilla. You've spoken around your love of, Red Hat, working for Eclipse and the kind of ethics out in the space, the mission. What's your hope for other companies out there of how they can run their organizations based on what you've learned on your journey?
That's a great question. And I definitely, I mentioned the humility that I learned earlier. I'm definitely humble here and don't feel that I have some magic answers. But I think the things that I've seen are most successful in my career in terms of, so they boil down to staying humble and asking people what they're bringing to the table, what they're interested in, how they want to grow, what motivates them. And when we can align those motivations, we get the best work out of people. And again, at Mozilla, we're lucky with this mission. People are attracted to that. They're sort of self-selecting into that, and then they're motivated by it intrinsically. But I think that applies to many situations. What is the person aligned by? Is it success? Is it career growth? Is it learning? Is it professional recognition? Is it maybe doing things that they can publish in a paper? And I think giving people the freedom to be able to speak publicly, whether that be at a conference or in a blog or writing a paper or that kind of thing, really allows people that expression and that freedom of expression. And so that's one way that people can be learned, so can grow. And so I think that as an organizational leader, it's all about aligning incentives, having clear goals, repeating those goals, and making sure that the right people are in place to learn and grow as a team. And remembering that it is a team sport, because we talk a lot about evaluating individual developer productivity, and really that is not best practice. It is all about the team. You're reviewing my code. That means that we're bottlenecked on each other's review bandwidth. We're working on a system. That system needs to be faster. We're bottlenecked on the system's capabilities. We're working in a standards base with an external party. We're blocked on that communication. So it's all about that communication and knowing that it is a full system that is working together here. And how do we find the slow points and optimize for that? Same thing goes for a human organization, because at the end of the day, we're all human.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It's about the team, I used to be very individualistic. I used to be very kind of that kind of masculine, egotistical kind of like, yeah, me. And thankfully I've learned the lesson that it is about the team, and it's about it's not the I, it's the we. Here you go. Maybe this is a tough question. I'm not sure, but what's the weight that you carry as a leader, quietly and privately? Are you willing to share it here?
So I think that in many situations, it is situationally dependent. So when there's an organizational change that we need to work toward, I think that's a weight that all leaders carry, of how do you understand and internalize the organizational need for something well, that that the implications of it are going to have may be on individuals in the organization, and how do you tailor that? How do you adjust for that? How do you speak to it plainly enough that people understand the motivations and understand that they may have to make a change because of it that they maybe don't agree with? So how do you get to that disagree and commit type of thing? And so personally, those are the weights that I carry in the organization that I am in. Of course, we've spoke before about the broader weights around responsibility as stewards of the web and as stewards of this human resource. But internally, at the end of the day, I am an organizational leader at Mozilla, and there are a few hundred people that I am responsible for their career opportunities, ensuring equitable career opportunities, ensuring so growth opportunities there. How do we highlight that work? How do we provide them opportunities that motivate them? And at the end of the day, they're humans. So how do you provide space for them to live a life that isn't fully dominated by their work, fully consumed by it?
Beautiful. That's a beautiful weight that you carry there. It's got a real kind of nobleness about it. I like that. That's great. So I always ask this question. I've got a few questions left. One is any books or any particular things that have been very instrumental in your journey as a techie to tech leadership that you'd like to share here, so we can maybe go off and watch it or read it?
So I think that as I look at my business bookshelf, there are a number of the classics, Humanware or Peopleware, Good to Great, Managing Humans. They're classics, but they're classics for a reason. And I think they are They're the things that I read early in my career as a manager, and they've really influenced the way that I approach things. But for me personally, I think consuming cultural things like books or plays, or, I'm a fan of musical theater. The messages that I get from those, I apply to my work context all the time. And so I think immersing oneself in culture is always good for advancing their professional lives as well. Like right now, I'm reading The Count of Monte Cristo. I somehow never read it, years ago, and I'm reading it right now. And I'm reading it before bed, so I only get through about 10 pages before I fall asleep every day. But it is provided, I think. So the thing is, TC, I would say that my personal political motivations are often reinforced by what I consume in the media or in culture, in the arts. And I do wonder if that applies to everybody or if that's unique to me. Like, I mean, when you watch a movie, do you pull out of it? You're like, oh, I identify with that character and I identify with that plot point.
Yeah, 100%. I do that too.
So I think for me, it's just the breadth of those things that I consume, reading about artists' stories. I like to spend a lot of time on various artists' websites, or I spend a lot of time on Wikipedia being like, I hear a song, oh, this song is amazing. Where is this band from? What can I learn about them? And then learning their stories and being inspired and sort of, amalgamating their best practices and what they've learned, because, it's a shared journey we're on here.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. That's great. I often listen to random, in fact, I call it YouTube adventures or Wikipedia adventures. I just go and find random topics and see where the links take me, what relates to what, and I end up down some proper rabbit holes. But I'm always able to translate it into, what does that mean to me? What does that mean to my context, my journey? So
yes. Do you ever do pub trivia, Dizzy?
No, I've not done that.
Like going to a pub and having trivia.
Yeah, we have a local pub here. You know us Brits, we love our pubs.
I figured I didn't want to stereotype, but so I am a huge fan of trivia and going with friends or going with colleagues, and we go and so that really, I mentioned this thing about learning earlier. I've realized as I've gotten older that I do value the learning professionally, but also learning personally, and I love that kind of thing. And so I spend a lot of time, like you, on Wikipedia rabbit holes or learning different things from YouTube. Yeah.
Brilliant. I love it. And a wish. I want to offer you a wish from the Tech Genie, okay? The Tech Genie is going to offer you a wish for tech. Maybe it's for leadership, maybe it's for your people, maybe it's for the organization. What would you wish for?
I would wish for easier reproducibility of bugs. And that sounds so stupid, but I will tell you, like, I often think, like, what is the most efficient way that I can work as a developer? Let's say you're a developer and you're an expert in a particular area. How do I get the bugs fixed in your area? Well, it's that I bring you a laptop, a phone, a device where the bug is reproducible right now, and you're paused in a debugger at that point. So how do we get to the point where things are more reproducible? Because we run into so many problems where works on my machine, works for me, can't reproduce. And that is so frustrating for users. It drives users away. It gets in the way of them getting their work done. And people are too busy to be able to send us bug reports or whatever. And so how do we get to the point where we can make things more reproducible so that we can actually fix the problems? Because once you've got that, I mentioned the security bug that we fixed in 11 hours, and got out there. Like, that's because people were able to immediately reproduce it, find the root problem, come up with a solution, and then work together. How do we get to that point for all of the millions of bugs that exist in the world?
Yeah, as you were answering that question, I jumped out of being the genie back into being a developer, and I remember those moments thinking, oh, we know it happened, but how do we recreate it? Because it was a blend of circumstances and certain things happening at a particular time. And in the embedded world, where I come from, that's even more, because you've got real-time systems doing random stuff, interacting with other stuff. So yeah, 100%, I'm going to make that one come true, because that one
I appreciate that. I look forward to it.
Excellent. So as we part company, Andrew, what's your final word? What's your final gift to the tech leader audience, or the tech audience out there listening to this podcast as a parting gift? What would you like to leave them with?
I don't know if it's a gift so much as an invitation. And that would be to get involved where you're able to, at whatever level you're able to, in this shared journey we're on of having a better web that is open and accessible to all. So whether that be filing a bug that is reproducible for your friendly web developer or your web browser developer, or whether you actually contribute your expertise or your interest for a new feature, or writing an extension that scratches the itch for your local community, or learning the latest technology and using tools that are open as you expand your capabilities of writing a website for your local club, your local school, whatever it may be. And I think that together we can have a more organic and human-powered web that is both open and accessible for everybody, and also as we all work as a shared journey to put ourselves in control of the evolution of this technology that is impacting so many of us.
100%. Lovely. What a great note to finish on. Love it. Thank you for your time, Andrew. It's been great having you on CTO Confessions.